The Nikon Z50II. Is this feature, or non-feature, a deal breaker for you when it comes to deciding whether to buy this camera or not? Find out what it is next. Thanks for tuning in, guys. Well, a lot of you that have seen my recent Nikon Z52 videos mentioned in the comments that you're not going to bother buying this camera purely for the fact that it doesn't have IBIS or VR or vibration reduction inside the camera. Now, I completely understand why people are a little disgruntled with this. Being a relatively new camera, I guess people were expecting Nikon to give them internal VR with the Z52. All of Nikon's Z crop sensor range of cameras don't have internal VR. But how bad is it really not having VR or IBIS inside of a camera? Well, today I'm going to do a very simple test doing some handheld video. I'm going to be using two lenses. One lens doesn't have VR. That's the Nikon 24 to 120mm f4S lens. The other lens does have VR. This is the Nikon ZDX 18 to 140mm lens. I'm going to start off with the Nikon 24 to 120mm lens, which does not have any VR built into it. Okay, so I've got the Nikon 24 to 120mm f4S lens. I've got a beautiful little scene where I've got this creek just flying through here. I'm going to get some video looking at it handheld. So if we have a look through the camera, so this is at 24mm and I'm shooting 4K at 25 frames per second. So let's just go and record. I'm doing my very best. So this is at 24mm. I'm doing my very best to hold this as steady as I can. But you can see there's just this little bit of a jitter on the corners. In the middle it's not too bad, but you can just see there's just this tiny bit of shaking around the outside edge. Now where it gets really worse is if you zoom in. So if you go closer into where this creek is just flowing over this tree root here. So this is at 120mm. And you can see when you zoom in, it's much worse. Like, I'm doing my best to try and hold this as steady as I can. So this is what it's like if you're doing handheld. The lens has no VR, the Nikon Z50 has no VR, and this is the result. So it's pretty much unusable when you're zoomed into 120. Now let's go back out to 24. See, when you push out to wide, it is much better. What I'll do now is I'll just switch over and I'm going to put electronic VR on. But see, you can see already what's happened is it's much steadier now, definitely much steadier. But we've had a crop now. It's cropped in quite substantially from the other 24mm. So let's push into 120mm with the electronic VR on. You can see the difference. So just a couple of issues there when you're using that electronic VR inside the Z52. You do get that noticeable crops right into your shot, as well as sometimes I get this weird type of wobble. So it's trying to, fight, it's trying to steady the shot. So every now and again I get that weird type of shimmer on my shot. So I tend to avoid that. Okay, so that's what it's like using a lens that has no VR built into it, handheld in video. Let's put on the Nikon 18 to 140mm DX lens that does have VR built in and see how we go getting the exact same shot. Okay, so now I've switched over to the Nikon ZDX 18 to 140mm lens. Let's do that same exact shot, same framing. Let's try it at 18mm, 4K, 25 frames per second. Now this is without the electronic VR on. I'm doing my very best to hold this, and let's just go and record here. So that's pretty good. It makes such a difference when you've got VR on the lens. While I'm here, let's push in all the way into 140, into that little creek flowing through there in that gap. And again, really beautiful and steady. So I don't have my arms wedged in or anything like that. I'm just holding the camera very steady like this. Okay, so now for a bit of fun. While I've got this lens on, let's try the electronic VR. Just going into the menu here down the bottom. Oops. I'm going to turn that on. Now you can see we've got a bit of a crop and there's a plane going overhead of me. Sorry if you can hear that. I thought I'd escape to nature to get away from all the traffic and everything, and sure enough a plane flies straight over my head. Anyway, so this is at 18 millimeters. You can see now that it added a little bit of a crop. Let's go all the way into that little bit of a flowing creek there. Now this is handheld with the electronic VR. So there you go. That's doing handheld video with both a lens that doesn't have VR and a lens that does. Now, of course, there are ways of getting around this shakiness in your shots. You can buy a tripod or monopod, or even use a flat surface to help keep your shot steady. But for a lot of people that are traveling and on the go constantly, that's not ideal, and a bit of a pain lugging around extra gear. Plus, it takes time to set it up. Alternatively, you can ensure that you only use lenses with VR built into them with the Z50II. But again, that's not ideal, and that does limit you in terms of lens selection. So if you're wanting a camera that can shoot in those slower shutter speeds and maybe much steadier handheld in video when not using VR lenses, then maybe you might want to consider going with a full frame Nikon Z camera instead. I guess a lot of people getting into photography for the first time, they may not even know what IBIS or VR is, so I'm kind of hoping this video gives them a little bit of a heads up. Anyway guys, as I always say, never stop creating, and I'll see you next time.